She raised her hand slowly, calm as ever, as 5 officers screamed conflicting orders. What they didn't know: the woman they targeted had the power to destroy their entire department with one phone call. The sun had barely climbed above the skyline of Charleston, South Carolina, when Nia Carter stepped out of her apartment complex. Unaware that this would be the day her name would ricochet across headlines, courtrooms, Capitol Hill, with her long box braids tied neatly back by a burgundy ribbon, and a calm strength in her stride, she was every bit the woman her late mother raised her to be: composed, intelligent, and fiercely independent. Her caramel-toned skin glistened under the morning light,
matching the golden accents of the sunrise.
As she walked toward her Jeep Cherokee parked across the quiet street, Nia wasn't just anyone. She was a decorated U.S. Army intelligence officer, turned civil rights attorney who had recently returned to her hometown to begin a new chapter. As a woman with medals in one drawer and community awards in the other, she was used to people underestimating her until they saw her credentials. She had helped shut down corrupt precincts in 3 states. She'd built civil rights cases that made headlines. But on that quiet morning, wearing a mustard yellow floral midi dress, a cropped denim jacket, and tan ankle boots, she didn't look like a powerhouse. She looked like a woman running errands. Just as she was unlocking her SUV, a black and white patrol car screeched to a stop across the street. 2 more cruisers followed seconds later. The tires hadn't even fully halted before 3 officers jumped out. Hands already on holsters, shouts piercing the morning calm. "Hey, you step away from the vehicle? Hands up. Put your hands where I can see them now." Confused, Nia blinked and took a step back from her car, her heart pounding but her training kicking in. Shh. She raised her hands slowly. Her voice was firm, clear. "Officers, I believe there's been a mistake. I live here." But they weren't listening. A 4th officer emerged, weapon drawn, crouching behind the open door of his cruiser like he was in a movie. They were yelling over each other, "Turn around, don't move," on the ground. Their radios crackled with noise. Neighbors peeked through windows. Phones began recording. Nia's mind sharpened. She kept her posture tall, her eyes steady, and her voice measured. "My name is Nia Carter. I'm a civil rights attorney. You are making a critical mistake." Didn't pause. It wasn't until a 5th cruiser arrived and a female sergeant stepped out that something shifted. The sergeant, older, with wary eyes and a hand hovering above her holstered gun, scanned the scene. She took in Nia's calm demeanor, the absence of a weapon, and the lack of any threat. "Hold up," she said, raising her voice. "Everyone stand down for a second." An awkward silence fell. Nia used that moment. "Sergeant, I'm reaching into my jacket pocket to pull out my military ID and state bar card. I am not armed. I will do so slowly." The sergeant gave a tense nod. Nia moved with precision. Out came 2 laminated cards, one with her military clearance, the other showing she was a licensed attorney in 3 states. The younger officers exchanged glances. The one with the drawn gun actually stuttered, "W.E. had a bolo. A black woman with braids. Carjacking. Suspect." Nia tilted her head, jaw clenched. "And so, you drew 5 guns on me?" She didn't yell, she didn't cry, but her presence hit them harder than a courtroom cross-examination. The sergeant stepped forward, snatched the IDs, and her expression soured when she read the names. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I've heard of you. You're the Nia Carter." Nia took a long breath. "You're going to want to make some calls." A strained silence settled over the street like a low fog as the sergeant lowered her head, still clutching Nia Carter's military and bar ID cards. She turned toward the younger officers, her face paling with the weight of what had just occurred. The neighborhood, still in a hush from the incident, had now become a live broadcast set, with phones lifted and neighbors murmuring behind fences and from front porches. Every camera captured the moment when 4 armed officers, red-faced and rattled, took a shaky step back from a woman they had wrongly accused, only to learn she was not only innocent, but influential. Sergeant Hale, Nia said sharply, "Yet, With poise, I need the names and badge numbers of every officer here. And I want the body cam footage preserved. Immediately. Yes, ma'am, the sergeant nodded, her voice almost too quiet to be heard. She turned to her subordinates with a hard edge. You heard her. Secure the footage now. The officers snapped to it, fumbling with their body cams and radios, avoiding Nia's eyes. They weren't just embarrassed, they were scared. Because even if they hadn't known her name before, they knew it now. Nia Carter was a former military intelligence officer who had taken on corrupt city officials, sued entire police departments, when every case she touched like a scalpel cutting through lies. But today wasn't about power, it was about what she had endured yet again. Nia's hands were still slightly trembling from adrenaline, though her face showed no sign of weakness. She calmly took her cards back from the sergeant, then looked directly into the nearest cell phone camera. Record. This, she said. I am filing a formal complaint, and if necessary, a lawsuit. I have been wrongly targeted, humiliated, and put at risk in front of my home. Well, the Charleston Police Department will answer for this. Then, still calm but firm, she walked back to her Jeep, unlocked it, and got inside. She didn't drive away. Immediately, she sat still, breathing, replaying it all in her mind. Her hands shook once more, not from fear, but fury. 2 hours later, Nia walked into her office in downtown Charleston. Her firm Carter Justice Solutions had only opened 4 months ago, but the glass door already bore her full name in bold white letters. Inside, her assistant, Jenna White, mid-30s and fiercely loyal, leapt from her desk. Are you okay? I saw the video. It's everywhere already. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. You're trending nationwide, Nia. Nia gave her a tired smile, but that was fast. Jenna followed her into the office, locking the door behind them. The comments are wild. People are furious. Civil rights groups are already reaching out. News anchors want interviews. There's even a hashtag they pulled on NIA. Nia sank into her chair. Good. Let them be mad. It's time Charleston PD learned what it means to aim before they fire. She pulled out her tablet and tapped into her cloud drive. She already had folders labeled for police misconduct. She opened a new one, Charleston Incident, July 25th. She began documenting everything: the time, the officers, the interaction, her words, their words. She attached the video clips already flooding social media. One even had subtitles and a slow-motion replay of her raising her hands. Another was already analyzed by a lawyer on YouTube with over 200K views. Nia, Jenna said gently. What do you want to do next? Nia's face hardened. We're going public. Full press conference. Civil suit. And I want to sit down with the mayor, the police chief, and every city council member in that building. But Jenna hesitated. Won't they try to spin it? Say it was a misunderstanding? They drew 5 guns on me, Jenna, she said, voice low but powerful, in front of my own home. If I had twitched the wrong way, I'd be a headline, but not the talking kind. They don't get to spin this, Jenna nodded. I'll call the media. The next day, Nia stood in front of a packed courthouse lawn. Dozens of microphones were pointed her way. Reporters packed in, and so did community members, some holding homemade signs that read, "Protect Black Women." Justice for Nia, and end racial profiling now. The Charleston mayor stood at a distance, her arms crossed tightly. The chief of police, red-faced and stone-eyed, flanked her. Nia wore a tailored black suit, her box braids pinned neatly in a low bun. Her caramel-toned skin glowed under the hot sun, and her stance radiated unshakable confidence. She didn't read a script. She didn't need to. I am here today, she began, because I survived a moment that many don't. I survived being black, unarmed, and wrongly targeted by armed police officers in my own neighborhood. I was calm. I was compliant. I was professional. And yet my life was one mistake away from ending. A murmur passed through the crowd. Cameras clicked. Phones streamed. I served this country. I've worn the uniform. And yet that did not shield me from the barrel of a gun drawn by someone who saw my skin before they saw my soul. Behind her, the mayor shifted uncomfortably. I'm not just here to talk about my story. I'm here for the thousands who never. Gotta tell theirs? For Brianna? For Sandra? For Atashiana? For all the women who were never allowed to explain themselves, were never believed, and who were never allowed to walk away. Applause broke out fierce and emotional. This ends now, she said. Not just for me, for every woman who looks like me. I will use every legal tool, every national platform, every ounce of my credibility to demand accountability and reform. We will retrain, restructure, and rebuild this broken system. By the time she stepped away from the podium, her inbox had 142 new emails, legal firms offering help, networks requesting interviews, universities asking her to speak, and at the back of the crowd stood a familiar face, Captain Ellis Monroe. Her former commanding officer in Army intelligence. He approached with a knowing smile. Still changing the world, huh? She embraced him, trying. You here to help? He pulled out a folder. It's not just help. I've got intel. Something tells me this wasn't random. Nia's brow lifted. Go on. The bolo that led them to you? It was issued anonymously. No real suspect. No real vehicle. It was a planted alert. Shh. She stiffened. You're saying this was targeted? He nodded grimly. It's like someone inside the department wanted you scared, wanted to send a message. A chill moved through her body, but Nia Carter didn't flinch. Oh, she said, voice turning to steel. Then it's time I sent one back. Nia's voice was low, firm, and slicing through the air like a scalpel. The two of them, Nia and Captain Ellis Monroe, just outside the courthouse. Their silhouettes cast in golden sunlight as murmurs. From the dispersing press conference trailed behind them. Nia's jaw was tight, her arms crossed over her black blazer. The intensity in her eyes rivaling the heat in the summer air. Ellis nodded, ran a trace on it through a contact still. At the bureau, there was no matching incident, no carjacking reported, no suspect profile officially logged. It was manually added into the system about 25 minutes before the patrol spotted you. That's not a coincidence, she said. No, he agreed. That was a setup. Nia's mind raced. She wasn't just a lawyer, she was trained to think like an investigator, like an intelligence officer. Patterns, motives, networks. Someone had planted a fake alert in the system, an alert specifically crafted to describe her. Black woman, braids, SUV, then ensured that it would reach the exact precinct with a known history of aggressive stops. Who has access to add bolos manually? She asked. Supervisors, detectives, and IT with high-level admin clearance, Ellis said. But if someone in the system knows how to manipulate metadata, it wouldn't even show they made the change. That's why you need someone like me to look where they don't want us to. Nia exhaled. Her heart beat harder, not in fear, but focus. Okay, we dig. Quietly, no assumptions. I want this airtight. We'll use the official complaint to stall them publicly while we investigate behind the scenes. Liz gave her a small smirk. I knew you wouldn't just sue and walk away. Sue and walk away, she said. I'm about to unravel this entire department. Later that evening, Nia sat in her home office, surrounded by dual monitors, printed files, and stacks of deposition transcripts from her prior civil rights cases. Her box braids were tied back in a low bun, and her mustard yellow dress had been replaced with a simple black tee and joggers. The glow from her screen illuminated her caramel-toned face as her fingers flew across the keyboard. She was digging through public records, internal audits of the Charleston Police Department, disciplinary actions, budget allocations, officer complaint logs. She highlighted anything suspicious. Officers with multiple use of force complaints but no disciplinary action. Memos that had gone missing. Body cams that had mysteriously malfunctioned. And then she found it. A report buried in the public record archive. Memo from an internal affairs officer named L.T. Owen Bristow would raise concerns about questionable targeting of prominent local figures, particularly those affiliated with racial justice movements. His report had been dismissed. He had been reassigned to traffic duty the next week. Nia whispered under her breath, "There you are." She clicked further and traced LT, Bristow's last known assignment. He had moved into obscurity, but he still existed. She sent him a discreet email using an encrypted address and requested a meeting at a secure location. Across the room, Jenna entered, holding a mug of chamomile tea. "You're supposed to be resting." Nia smiled faintly. "I'll rest when I'm done." "Is this about the planted bolo?" "It's bigger than that," Nia said. "I think I just found someone who tried to expose it before and got buried for it." The next day, Nia met LT Bristow at a quiet fishing dock, far from the city. He was tall, white, in his mid-40s, with tired eyes and a cautious posture. He recognized her instantly. "You're braver than me," he said as he handed her a manila envelope. "They tried to destroy me for asking questions. You're trying to destroy the whole machine." Nia opened the envelope carefully. Inside were copies of emails, reports, internal memos, and screenshots of system logs. It was a paper trail showing a disturbing trend officers in Charleston PD had, for over a year, used false bolo alerts to stop and harass local activists, politicians, and journalists. Each time, the description would be vague. Black man, black. Woman matches description. The purpose was intimidation. Suppression. They created fear, Bristow said. Every time someone filed a complaint, they'd leak dirt on them to the media or claim it was a coincidence. It's the kind of playbook you expect in a regime, not a Southern American city. Nia read quickly but methodically. Her heart pounded, but her mind remained razor-sharp. "Why didn't you go public?" "They threatened my wife. They told her she'd lose her teaching job if I didn't shut up." She looked up and now. "She left me," he said quietly. "Moved to her sister's in Charlotte, took the kids. I've got nothing left to lose." Nia nodded slowly. "Good, because I'm going to need everything you've got." Days later, Nia stood before the mayor and the police chief inside a closed-door meeting arranged through legal pressure. Her lawyer credentials, military background, and public outcry gave her leverage. Ellis Monroe sat beside her, silent but imposing. "I know what your department has been doing," Nia began, her tone controlled but deadly. "I have documentation, I have witnesses, and I have national media watching." The police chief tried to speak, but Nia cut him off. "Don't insult me with denial. This isn't about one officer or one mistake. This is a pattern, and I can prove it." The mayor leaned forward. "What exactly are you asking for, Ms. Carter?" "I want full access to the department's internal audit logs. I want a list of every bolo added in the last 12 months. I want public disciplinary hearings for any officer with more than 3 excessive force complaints. And I want every officer retrained by someone not in your current command structure." Room froze. The chief laughed bitterly. "That's a fantasy. You think we're just going to roll over?" "No," Nia said, eyes gleaming. "I think you'll agree. Once I file the class action lawsuit, once I release the bolo manipulation logs, once I testify before Congress on what I've found." The mayor's face drained of color. She turned to the chief. "If she's got evidence, we can't risk national backlash. It's not in this election year." Nia smiled faintly. "Your re-election isn't my problem. Justice is." That evening, Nia stood once more before a crowd, this time in a church auditorium, packed with citizens, civil rights leaders, and victims of police misconduct. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice carried. "What happened to me is just the tip of the iceberg," she declared. "But I refuse to live in fear. I refuse to be quiet. And I refuse to let any officer or official treat black life as disposable." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "Tomorrow, I'm filing a federal lawsuit, but tonight I'm asking you to stand with me. If you've been targeted, harassed, profiled, or silenced, come forward. This time we fight together." Stood, one by one, then rows of them, and then applause thundered through the hall. The city was shifting. Nia Carter didn't ask for war, but when it came to her door, she met it with facts, fire, and a fierce love for justice. The lawsuit was filed at precisely 9:02 a.m. the next morning. Federal court documents bore Nia Carter's name at the top of every page, alongside a list of plaintiffs that was already 20 names long, with more pouring in every hour. The document was explosive, detailing systemic targeting through fraudulent bolo alerts, profiling based on race and hair alone, intimidation of internal whistleblowers, suppression of civilian complaints through coordinated retaliation. It wasn't just a legal filing, it was a declaration of war. Jenna burst into Nia's office moments after submitting the final brief. CNN just picked it up. And MSNBC? And hold on, yeah, the Washington Post is reaching out for an exclusive. Nia stood near the window, watching the slow stir of downtown Charleston outside. Good, let the world see what this city has. Buried, she turned, face unreadable, but eyes bright with fire. Today we stopped fighting the symptoms. Today we go after the disease. Meanwhile, inside Charleston Police Headquarters, the air had changed. Captain Morgan Tate, head of internal affairs and a man once seen as untouchable, now sat pale-faced at a conference table surrounded by attorneys. He had been one of the silent enforcers, never pulling a trigger himself, but always ensuring that complaints went missing, footage was corrupted, and whistleblowers like L.T. Bristow were quietly erased. Now his name was plastered across page 5 of the federal complaint. You told me the Carter woman didn't have any proof, the police chief hissed. Tate shrugged, but sweat glistened on his temple. She shouldn't have. But someone leaked internal logs. She's got stuff that was supposed to be deleted. Bristow, the mayor snapped, or someone else. Tate's jaw clenched. She's good. She's really good. They all turned to the screen where Nia's press conference was now being replayed. Her words echoed through the boardroom. Every officer retrained by someone outside your command. Structure. She's trying to dismantle us. No, the mayor said slowly, panic creeping in. She's trying to expose us and use it to build something stronger. As the city government scrambled, Nia went to work with Ellis Monroe. By her side, she established a task force made up of former federal investigators, data analysts, civil rights lawyers, and tech experts. She turned her office conference room into a war room, with corkboards filled with bolo patterns, officer deployment logs, maps of stop-and-frisk incidents, and red yarn connecting names across departments. This one here, Ellis said, pointing to a cluster of pins, is a problem. Officer Damian Ruark, on record as leading or assisting in 8 coincidental stops of known activists, most of them women. He's never filed a body cam log. All his footage is corrupted. Pattern of abuse, Nia muttered. Add him to the deposition list. And this one, Jenna said, pushing a folder forward. L.T. Haley Marks, same precinct? She's been sitting in on dozens of interrogations even when she wasn't assigned. Guess who filed the bolo against you under someone else's badge code? Nia looked up sharply. It was Marks. Jenna nodded grimly. We got confirmation from the IT forensic team. She cloned a login and pushed the bolo manually. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Nia's face. She's going to regret that. Later that week, Nia sat face-to-face with L.T. Haley Marks during a closed-door deposition. Cameras rolling, stenographers transcribing every word. L.T. Marks, white, mid-30s, with tightly pinned blonde hair and a stiff jaw, wore her uniform like armor. You're under oath, Lieutenant, Nia said calmly, and I advise you to consider your next answers carefully. I had nothing to do with that bolo, Marks said coldly. Nia slid a printed forensic report across the table. This says otherwise. It came from your terminal. Using credentials assigned to an officer who was off duty and on medical leave. That's digital fraud. Marks blinked. Just once. But Nia saw it. The crack in her wall? You thought I'd just walk away, Nia continued. But I've spent my career exposing people like you. You don't scare me, Lieutenant. And soon your badge won't protect you either. From the far end of the room, Ellis leaned forward. Your best move now is cooperation. We're building a case that'll go beyond civil court. Think RICO. Think federal. Marks looked like she wanted to vanish into her chair. By the end of the month, 3 more officers were suspended pending investigation. The mayor, sensing her political career hanging by a thread, reluctantly agreed to create an independent civilian oversight board for Charleston. PD with Nia Carter at the helm. But Nia wasn't finished. She had learned through Ellis that some of the targeting was being driven by external influenza. Wealthy private contractor who had been selling surveillance tech to the city under the table, software that auto-flagged certain profiles as threats disproportionately, marking black and brown citizens for suspicious behavior. The contractor's name, Bryce Weller, a former DHS data analyst turned corporate CEO. Weller had built an empire on government contracts, hiding behind shell companies. He was polished, dangerous, and now publicly connected to the Charleston scandal. Thanks to a bold expose Nia published in The Atlantic, Weller responded the next day with a lawsuit of his own. "You want a war?" he said on national television. "She just got one." Nia smiled when she saw it. "Good, let him come." To her team, she said, "We don't back down. We double down." Ellis added, "We can link Weller to at least 4 other cities. If we take him down, we don't just clean up Charleston, we change the entire country's conversation." And that's exactly what Nia intended to do. In just 30 days, Charleston went from a quiet southern city to the epicenter of a national reckoning. Activists from around the country flew in. Senators requested briefings. Young black girls wore T-shirts with Nia Carter's face on them and the phrase, "She raised her hands, then raised hell." But Nia knew it wasn't over. The more she uncovered, the deeper the rot seemed to go. Her life became a blur of depositions, media interviews, legal filings, task force meetings, and threats. Some days she had to be escorted by private security funded by a coalition of donors who admired her courage. Other days, she found handwritten notes slipped under her door that simply read, "Thank you." Each night as she lay in bed, she remembered that day of the sun on her face, the guns in her vision, the way her voice never cracked, and every time she thought of quitting, she saw those bystanders with phones and the officers' trembling hands, and she reminded herself, "I survived. Now I make sure others do too." Press conference had ignited a firestorm across the country. Nia Carter's name was everywhere in news tickers, across social media platforms, on protest signs, and in heated debates on TV panels. Her calm but commanding presence, the video footage of the officers screaming at her with weapons drawn, her stunning revelation as a Department of Justice, civil rights special investigator had shattered illusions and exposed a rot far deeper than anyone had imagined. But for Nia, the true battle was only beginning. As the media spotlight intensified, so did the pressure. Every move she made was scrutinized, and every person associated with her faced scrutiny. Her sister Tiana, who had been the one to call and warn her of the initial reports on the news, and to temporarily close her wellness business in D.C. due to threats and harassment. Their mother in Atlanta was hounded by local reporters. But Nia remained steadfast, anchored by something stronger than the rage around her: purpose. Inside the Department of Justice, whispers turned into meetings. There were those who saw her revelation as a betrayal of departmental neutrality, but just as many saw it as the wake-up call the system had long needed. The Deputy Attorney General, a stoic man named Elijah Brooker, reached out privately. Wasn't one to smile often, but he did when he met Nia in a glass-walled conference room. "You've caused a storm," he said, sipping black coffee, "but sometimes that's exactly what's needed to clear the air." Nia nodded. "Ask for this storm, sir, but I'm not backing down from it either." Brooker gave her a long look, then slid a thick folder across the table. "We're reopening 6 federal investigations into excessive force cases. I want you to lead them." Nia froze. 6 departments, all with long records. Buried complaints, fudged evidence. "I've handpicked them. You're the only person I trust to see this through." It was a tremendous responsibility, and it came with risk both politically and personally. But Nia didn't hesitate. "I'll do it," she said. That night, back in her apartment, Nia sat on her balcony, a glass of chilled ginger tea in hand, watching the city buzz beneath her. The Washington Monument was faint in the distance, a reminder of the ideals the country was supposed to represent. She thought of the young girl in Chicago who had written her a letter after the press conference, Miss Carter. I want to be brave like you when I grow up. Thank you for showing people that black women aren't afraid. Nia smiled softly. That one line made every threat, every hate message, every sleepless night worth it. The following week, Nia flew to Houston. First target, the Jefferson City Police Department. Years of quietly buried complaints, body cam footage that conveniently malfunctioned, a culture of intimidation. She walked into the precinct wearing her DOJ badge and a custom-tailored navy blazer. It made it clear she wasn't there for small talk. The air changed the moment she entered. Officers shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded in respect. Others sneered Chief Roderick Ames. A burly white man in his early 60s, with years of politics under his badge, greeted her with false charm. Well, Ms. Carter, I've seen your face all over the news. Don't suppose this is a friendly visit? Nia extended her hand. Depends on what you've got to hide, Chief Ames. Behind her, her assistant Jordan, a young law clerk, fresh out of Howard University, stifled a grin. The investigation was like slicing into spoiled fruit. What looked okay from the outside revealed mold and decay within. Officers regularly lost dashcam footage. Minority suspects were booked at double the rate of white ones, often for identical charges. And worst of all, there was a pattern of retaliation against those who dared file complaints. Nia uncovered it all. She documented everything. She questioned every ranking officer. She made it clear that this wasn't a witch hunt. It was accountability. And when she found a handwritten memo from an internal affairs officer describing harassment and fatigue from citizens of color, her blood boiled. On the final day of the audit, Nia stood before the press once again, flanked by a wall of folders. The Jefferson City Police Department, she announced, has failed the standards of constitutional policing. The Department of Justice will be issuing federal consent decrees effective immediately. Gasps erupted. But not everyone was supportive. Protests formed, not just in defense of Nia, but against her too. The Blue Line crowd took to the streets, claiming she was dismantling law enforcement. Thinly veiled racism crept into headlines. She was called radical, too angry, divisive. Commentators mocked her style, her tone, her braids. Still, as she pressed on, in the middle of it all, Nia received an unexpected visit from Officer Damien, the only cop in the original wrongful stop, who had apologized privately to her. I didn't know who you were that day, he said quietly, but now I do. And I know I've been silent for too long. I want to help. Nia eyed him cautiously. Why now? Because it took almost losing my career and realizing I helped put a gun in your face to understand how broken this system is. I've been part of the problem. Nia could read people. She knew when someone was performative. But Damien wasn't lying, so she gave him a task. Testify to Congress. On record. As an officer who's been inside it, he swallowed hard. That'll end my career. She stared at him. So did yours almost ending teach you nothing? A week later, Damien testified. National television, nerves in his voice, tears in his eyes when he described the pressure to conform, the fear of speaking up. And the moment he realized just how much his silence had cost, it was the first time a white officer from that precinct had spoken publicly. It sent shockwaves, one by one. It's like dominoes. Other departments Nia was investigating began to shake. Emerged. Hidden files surfaced. And amid it all, Nia's name climbed in, till eventually she wasn't just a face on the news. She was a symbol, a lightning rod, a reckoning. But all symbols come at a cost. One evening, her apartment was broken. Into nothing was stolen. But her files were scattered, her laptop smashed, and a note was left behind on her wall in red spray paint. Stay in your place. Darden. Found her hours later, sweeping up broken glass. We need to report this. Get you security. I've already called it in, she said calmly. They picked the wrong woman again. She stared at the wall. But this time, they'll learn. The press conference had ended, but its aftermath thundered across the nation like an earthquake. Videos of Nia Carter holding her ground in front of flashing cameras were on every news channel, dissected by pundits and praised by communities that had been waiting for a voice like hers. But the fight was only just beginning. Nia returned home. Late that evening, her energy drained from the emotional intensity of the day. Her caramel-toned skin looked tired, but resolute under the kitchen lights. The braids that had been perfectly arranged that morning were slightly loosened now, a physical sign of the storm she had walked through. As she slipped off her mustard yellow dress and exchanged it for a black hoodie and cotton sweatpants, the real battle ahead became clearer in her mind. She wasn't just fighting for herself. Anymore, she was fighting for every black woman wrongly accused, every child who flinched at flashing lights, and every family that never got justice. The emotional toll had begun to press heavily on her chest, but her resolve only deepened. Marcus, her cousin, sat beside her at the kitchen table, a comforting silence stretching between them until he finally said, "Nia, your war, we're all behind you." Meanwhile, inside police department headquarters, Chief Rourke sat with his legal team and internal affairs. Officer Malone had officially been suspended, but public demands were intensifying. Body cam footage had been leaked, showing Malone's aggressive posture and racial slurs that were omitted from his initial report. The department's PR team was struggling. Lawsuits loomed. But what truly frightened them was Nia's poise, her unbreakable calm in front of chaos. She wasn't screaming or crying on national TV. She was commanding, legal-minded, and composed, a narrative they couldn't distort. And while the media stirred and the police tried to reframe, Nia was preparing her case. Late nights were spent digging through legal codes, past lawsuits, body cam policies, and federal precedents. She had turned her entire living room into a strategy hub. Charts on the walls, evidence files on the floor, whiteboards covered in timelines, statutes, civil rights provisions. Every call she received came with more testimonies, other black women, single mothers, educators, doctors, all with stories of guns drawn, threats made, dignity stripped. Nia listened to every one, her heart a dam, barely holding back waves of rage and grief. And every story added another brick to the foundation of her legal offensive. She was also receiving protection threats. Though she had been offered private security, she declined it. Instead, she leaned on a close group of trusted friends, lawyers, journalists, even to former police officers who left the force due to corruption. Together, they were an unlikely but formidable team. Meanwhile, in a backroom conversation across town, city officials debated damage control. Some pushed for scapegoating Malone entirely, while others urged a public apology and systemic reform talks to cool tensions. Mayor Whitmore, sensing re-election slipping through her fingers, called for a private meeting with Nia. Nia declined. Instead, she announced a community town hall. She didn't want political lip service behind closed doors. She wanted transparency. In front of the people, at the town hall held in the community center, hundreds packed in. Elderly neighbors, local students, activists, faith leaders, every seat was filled. Nia stood at the front in a navy blazer over a crisp white blouse, her braids tied back, her presence radiant. She didn't give a speech. She opened the floor. One by one, people stood and shared their experiences. Some cried, some shouted, some trembled. Nia listened to them all, her face a portrait of compassion and fury. And when it was her turn to speak, her voice was calm yet full of steel. "We will not just hold individuals accountable," she said, locking eyes with cameras filming from the back. "We will restructure the system that trained them to see us as threats." The applause that followed shook the walls, but her boldness made her more enemies. An anonymous letter arrived the next day with threats of violence. Her tires were slashed. Someone broke a window in her car. But Nia, unshaken, filed reports and pressed forward. A major breakthrough came when an officer from Malone's unit reached out anonymously. He revealed that Malone had a history of misconduct, with multiple internal complaints buried by supervisors. The whistleblower provided documents, audio recordings, and even video evidence that painted a damning picture of systemic failure within the force. Nia and her team compiled everything. They filed a federal civil rights lawsuit, not just against Malone, but against the entire department and the city for enabling a culture of profiling and violence. That lawsuit became a national headline. Donations poured in. Civil rights organizations offered their legal arms. Even celebrities tweeted support. But it wasn't the fame Nia cared about. It was the pressure. The kind of pressure that forced governments to listen as hearings began. The courtroom filled with journalists, sketch artists, and citizens who once felt voiceless. Nia's presence was undeniable. She wasn't just a plaintiff. She was a force. Of nature in a sharp black suit and patent leather heels, every word from her mouth slicing through the defense's half-truths. But behind the scenes, police union lawyers were brutal. They attacked her personal life, dug into her finances, tried to discredit her professional work and reputation. They even questioned her behavior during the incident, painting her as uncooperative despite body cam footage, proving otherwise. Nia's voice never wavered. During her testimony, the courtroom fell silent. When a gun is drawn on you for the color of your skin, something inside you breaks. But what happens next, how you pick up the piece, defines you. I chose to fight. That sentence was quoted across newspapers, magazines, and talk shows. Outside the courtroom, supporters gathered with signs and candles. A mural of Nia was painted on the side of a local cafe, showing her hand raised not in surrender, but in power. The case was drawing to its climax. And Nia knew the verdict wouldn't just change her life. It would shape the future for millions. But then something unexpected happened. The officer who had drawn the gun on Harry Malone afforded to settle. Not just financially, but with full admission of wrongdoing and a list of reforms the department would publicly commit to. It was tempting. It would end things quicker. But Nia didn't want a deal behind doors. She wanted justice in the open, and so she declined. The courtroom drama was far from over, but so was Nia Carter. The courthouse was unusually silent for a weekday morning, almost as if it too understood the gravity of the case that was about to unfold within its walls. Outside, a growing crowd had begun to gather supporters, reporters, and citizens who had seen the viral footage of the incident that changed everything. Nia Carter, the brilliant, poised, and powerful woman at the center of the storm, arrived. Flanked by her legal team, camera shutters snapping and microphones pushing forward. But her calm demeanor didn't crack. Dressed in a sleek navy blue blazer with a sharp white blouse underneath and her braids tied back in a low, professional bun, she looked every bit the embodiment of resilience and justice. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The officers involved in the incident, detectives Russell and Jennings, sat across the courtroom, their lawyers whispering nervously. They no longer held the prideful postures they once did. The weight of public scrutiny and damning evidence had reshaped their identities from untouchable authority figures to defendants. Nia, however, remained a picture of strength and grace. Her caramel-toned skin glowed under the courtroom lights as she sat upright beside her attorney, her hands clasped with quiet resolve. What began as a civil suit for unlawful assault and emotional distress had quickly evolved into a landmark case about racial profiling, excessive force, and institutional accountability. The city watched, and the nation followed. On the stand, Nia's recounting of the incident was more than testimony. It was truth layered with emotion, measured intellect, and undeniable dignity. She described the moment their guns were drawn on her, the confusion, the fear that gave way to anger, and how her years of fighting for justice had steeled her for that exact moment. Then came the bombshell. Nia's attorney unveiled not only the body cam footage but also a suppressed internal report showing a history of misconduct by both officers. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as screens lit up with timestamps, documents, and redacted names of previous complainants. Many, then people of color, most of them silenced. For the first time, the courtroom didn't just see an isolated mistake. It saw a pattern. But Nia wasn't done. She brought forth a strategic and unexpected witness, Captain Alina Morales, a former precinct supervisor turned whistleblower. Elena's testimony shook the foundation of the officer's defense. She confirmed cover-ups, detailed falsified reports, and exposed how Nia's case was nearly buried until her status forced accountability. If she weren't who she is, Morales said plainly, we wouldn't be here today. The judge, an older man known for his stern neutrality, sat quietly through it all, occasionally raising an eyebrow but saying little. Yet, by the end of the day, his demeanor had shifted. He no longer looked like a man overseeing a simple civil case. He looked like someone who had been made to see the system he upheld from the other side. Outside, protests had turned into peaceful gatherings with banners showing Nia's image. Next to quotes from her speech at the press conference, I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for every voice they tried to silence. People chanted her name not out of celebrity, but because she had become a symbol of unbreakable dignity. Later that evening, Nia sat down for a long-anticipated live interview. Her look was different, more relaxed, more personal. Her braids were down, her blouse replaced by a soft rustering wrap dress. And her voice, though still calm, carried the weight of 1,000 stories she had come to represent. She didn't gloat, didn't seek vengeance. What happened to me wasn't rare, she said, but the response was, now, the responsibility is on all of us to make the rare become the norm. That night, the officer's defense team filed a motion to settle. They knew they were losing. The court of land had already lost the court of public opinion. But for Nia, it wasn't over. It had never just been about her case. It was about dismantling a system, and she had just begun. 10 seconds. That's all it took for a nation to witness the true face of justice being tested, and for one woman, Nia Carter, to make the world pause. The courtroom was packed. News outlets broadcasted the trial live across networks. Protesters lined the courthouse steps, some holding signs with Nia's image beside the words "Resilience looks like this," and she could have been killed. For months, the world had followed her story. A high-ranking civil rights attorney, mistakenly targeted by local cops who had drawn their guns on her in broad daylight, only to learn too late that she wasn't the suspect, but a keynote speaker for a police reform summit. The body cam footage had gone viral, the humiliation, the outrage, and Nia's graceful but fierce legal retaliation had stunned the nation. Now, Judgment Day had arrived. Inside the courtroom, Nia sat at the front bench beside her lead counsel, a former federal judge turned legal firebrand named Ayanna Rhodes. Nia's braided hair was swept into a bun. She wore a sharp charcoal gray pantsuit and a single gold bracelet that had once belonged to her grandmother. Her calm was unshakable, but her eyes blazed with quiet fury and conviction. The jury had deliberated for 2 days. They returned. Every seat in the gallery leaned forward. The entire courtroom held its breath. The foreman stood. In the matter of Carter v. Metro City Police Department, we find in favor of the plaintiff. Nia closed her eyes for one slow, trembling second. Applause erupted. People wept. Others clapped, not just because Nia had won, but because the city, and by extension, the country, had been forced to confront the cracks in its justice system. Not only had the jury awarded Nia a record-breaking $45 million in damages, but it demanded mandatory racial bias retraining, officer decertifications, and departmental restructuring, echoing her original demands. But the story didn't end with the verdict outside. The police chief, who had initially refused to apologize, finally issued a formal public apology, broadcast to millions. "We got it wrong," he said, voice strained. "We endangered an innocent woman because we failed to see her humanity. That ends today." In the months that followed, Nia launched the Carter Initiative, a civil rights nonprofit that focused on training departments across the U.S. in de-escalation, systemic bias, and community healing. The 2 officers who had drawn their weapons were decertified, and new legislation passed in 3 states. Nicknamed Carter's Law, banning officers from unholstering their weapons unless imminent danger was proven, not just perceived. Nia testified before Congress, standing beside families who had lost loved ones to mistaken identity and racially charged policing. Her voice carried the power of lived experience, but also the poise of a woman who had once been broken in public, and had rebuilt herself with fire. 1 year later, Nia stood before a sea of young law students at Howard University. Her keynote speech was the most anticipated of the year. When they drew guns on me, she said, they weren't just aiming at me. They were aiming at every little black girl they assumed didn't belong in a suit. Every educated, ambitious woman they feared would outshine them, but I stood. I'm still standing. The students roared with pride. After the event, a young girl approached her, 12 years old, hair in braids like Nia's once were, clutching a small notepad. Miss Carter. The girl asked shyly, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. Nia knelt and smiled, tears stinging her eyes. Don't be like me. Be better. Be bolder. Because now, they know your name matters. Somewhere in a dusty archive of police footage, a frozen frame still exists. 2 white officers. Guns drawn, faces twisted in confusion, aimed at a woman in heels. Holding a briefcase, calm and unshaken. That image changed everything. And Nia Carter. She changed the world. 5 years had passed since. The landmark verdict that shook Charleston and sent ripples across the nation. Carter had evolved from the determined civil rights attorney who faced down guns drawn and mistaken identity to a national leader in police reform and racial justice advocacy. Her nonprofit, the Carter Initiative, had grown into a powerful movement. It partnered with dozens of police departments nationwide, rewriting policies, introducing bias training, and creating community oversight boards modeled after her own battle-hardened standards. Cities that had once ignored complaints about profiling now invited her to speak, listen, and lead. But Nia remained deeply grounded. Despite her growing fame, she was featured on magazine covers, invited to presidential panels, and honored with awards. She lived simply in a brownstone in her hometown, surrounded by her close-knit family and friends. On a warm summer afternoon, Nia walked through a vibrant community center named after her, where young girls and boys learned leadership, law, and public speaking. Children with bright eyes and hopeful smiles ran past her, some wearing bracelets engraved with her initials. ensue. A small girl tugged her sleeve. Miss Carter, when will I be ready to stand up like you? Nia knelt down and smiled warmly, her eyes reflecting both wisdom and joy. Sweetheart, you're already ready. It's about believing your voice is powerful enough to change the world. And you already have that. News flashed on nearby screens about new legislation, inspired by Carter's Law, now enacted in 12 states. It dramatically decreased incidents of unnecessary use of force and held officers accountable in unprecedented ways. Meanwhile, in Charleston, a new generation of police officers trained under the reforms carried her name. They wore badges with a small emblem representing justice and humility. One afternoon, Nia received a call from a young woman in law enforcement who had recently graduated from the academy. I watched your trial when I was a kid, the officer said. You gave me hope that I could be part of a better system. Nia's heart swelled. She was no longer just a symbol of resistance. She was the architect of transformation. As the sun set behind the city skyline, Nia stood on her balcony. Once again. Her braids now silver-threaded, her stance calm but unyielding. The fight for justice was never over. But with every voice raised, every system challenged, and every young leader inspired, she knew the world was inching closer to what it should be, and that was a victory no one could take away. Several years after transforming police reform nationally, Nia Carter faced a new challenge: bridging the divide between communities and law enforcement through technology and education, invited to lead a federal task force on artificial intelligence in policing. She navigated the complex balance of innovation and civil rights. As she worked to prevent new forms of surveillance abuse, she also mentored a fresh generation of activists and lawyers determined to carry forward her legacy. But shadowy interests resistant to change surfaced again, testing her resilience and forcing her to confront the evolving nature of systemic injustice. Through unexpected alliances and relentless determination, Nia once more proved that progress demands courage and that the fight for justice is eternal. Decade had passed since the day Nia Carter stood unflinching as guns were drawn on her. The moment had become emblematic, a turning point that sparked nationwide reform and renewed conversations about race, justice, and accountability. Now in a sprawling conference hall in Washington, D.C., Nia stood before a new generation of leaders, activists, and policymakers gathered for the annual Justice Forward Summit, an event she had helped found to push systemic reform beyond policing into education, housing, and economic opportunity. Her hair was streaked with silver, but her presence remained as commanding as ever. Dressed in a tailored emerald green suit, she exuded a blend of wisdom and urgency. The room fell silent as she began. "We won a critical battle. But the war for justice is ongoing," she said. "The systems that oppressed us don't just vanish, they evolve, and so must we." The crowd hung on every word. Since the landmark case, Nia had expanded her mission. The Carter Initiative now partnered with schools, tech companies, community organizations to dismantle systemic biases embedded in everything from curriculum design to algorithmic policing. She led efforts to audit AI-driven predictive policing, tools that threaten to recreate old prejudices under new digital guises. But with progress came resistance. Powerful lobbyists and corporations challenged her reforms in courtrooms and legislatures. Disinformation campaigns tried to undermine her credibility. Yet, Nia met every challenge with unshakable resolve. Backstage, her longtime aide Jordan handed her a message. A whistleblower inside a major tech firm had come forward with evidence that an AI policing algorithm had disproportionately targeted minority neighborhoods, leading to unwarranted arrests and violence. Nia's eyes narrowed. "This isn't just policing anymore," she muttered. "This is systemic injustice wrapped in code." Her team sprang into action. Days later, Nia testified before Congress, detailing the tech company's failures and urging strict federal oversight of AI tools used in law enforcement. Her testimony sparked bipartisan hearings and renewed calls for transparency. In the midst of the battle, Nia found solace in unexpected moments. A letter from a young activist in Detroit, inspired by her work. A community garden dedicated in her name in Charleston. The laughter of her niece, who saw her as a superhero. The fight was different now, complex, technological, diffuse, but no less urgent. As she stood overlooking the Capitol one evening, Nia reflected on the journey. From a woman wrongly targeted at a traffic stop to a national leader reshaping justice itself. And she knew one thing: the struggle for equality is a relay. It's not a sprint, not a path the Pat Nan would keep running. As long as there was breath in her body, the courtroom battles had faded into history. But Nia Carter's fight for justice was far from over. Now recognized not just as a fierce litigator, but as a visionary leader. She turned her gaze toward systemic roots education, technology, and policy reform. At a bustling conference center in Atlanta, Nia addressed a diverse crowd of educators, tech experts, and policymakers. The annual Justice Forward Summit had grown from a small gathering into a national movement. She spoke passionately about dismantling systemic inequities in schools and confronting biases in emerging technologies. Justice is more than police reform, she said. It's ensuring our children learn truth, equity, and respect. It's ensuring algorithms don't reinforce the very biases we fight against. It's building communities where opportunity is a right, not a privilege. Her keynote was met with standing ovations, but behind the scenes, challenges mounted. Powerful corporations pushed back against transparency laws. School districts resisted curriculum changes, and new forms of digital surveillance threatened privacy and civil liberties. Yet, Nia remained undeterred. She collaborated with engineers developing ethical AI, partnered with community leaders to implement restorative justice in schools, and advised lawmakers drafting groundbreaking legislation. One late evening, in her modest office lined with books and framed photos of the movement she had helped ignite, Nia reflected on the journey. The weight of history was heavy, but so was the promise of progress. Her phone buzzed a message from her niece. Now in college, writing about starting a social justice club, A small smile played on Nia's lips. The torch was passing. The work continued, and Nia Carter was ready for the next chapter. The city of Charleston had changed. Streets once filled with protests now echoed with the footsteps of empowered youth, marching confidently toward a better future. Schools embraced curricula that taught history, honestly acknowledging past injustices and celebrating resilience. Police departments, once bastions of mistrust, now collaborated openly with communities through oversight boards inspired by Nia Carter's leadership. Nia, now in her mid-50s, walked through a renovated community center where young activists gathered. Her silver-streaked braids framed a face etched with wisdom and unwavering strength. Today she was mentoring a new generation voices, vibrant, passionate, and ready to carry the torch. One young woman approached, her eyes shining with determination. "Miss Carter, your story gave me courage. I'm starting a non-profit to help kids in my neighborhood," she said. Nia smiled warmly. "Good, the future belongs to those who build it." Meanwhile, at the national level, Nia's influence shaped policies that tackled systemic inequality beyond policing, housing, education, healthcare. She championed initiatives that gave marginalized communities real power in decision-making. Yet, challenges remained. Backlash from entrenched interests simmered, reminding everyone that progress was neither simple nor guaranteed. But with each success, each child inspired, and each barrier broken, Nia knew her fight had ignited something eternal as the sun set over Charleston. She stood on the porch of her childhood home, reflecting on the journey from that fateful day when guns were drawn to the ongoing movement she helped spark. Justice, she realized, wasn't a destination, it was a lifelong pursuit, and she was proud to be a part of it. Nia took a deep breath and looked toward the sky, where the sun was slowly setting and the city lights were beginning to shimmer, heralding the promise of a new dawn. She knew the fight was far from over, but in her heart, she held the certainty that every voice raised, every change made, every new leader rising was a step toward a better future. The woman who once had guns drawn on her had become the very light forging new paths for herself and for her people.